Welcome back. So just in case you're wondering, I can tell you that this cough thingy started a week before Christmas. So at this point, not infectious, just it won't go away. I don't know if this is a case of that, but in Malaysia growing up, we have this thing called the 100-day cough. Yes, and this could be a 100-day cough. Anyway, so today the lecture is on the Four Noble Truths. If you did not attend the last class, I highly recommend that you listen to that on the YouTube channel, where all these classes are recorded and then put onto that. Unfortunately, the YouTube channel name is kind of foreign and long. But if you are registered for this course, you should have gotten emails with those links to that. And why last week I feel is really important, because last week the last time we met, we were talking about, this is not something, I dare say, this is not something that you will typically hear at a Buddhist Dharma center or at a Buddhist monastery, at a Buddhist temple, because, well, for many reasons, we don't need to go into that. I think some of it will be obvious to you. What I did the last time we were here is to look at how the evolution of a wise, sagely charismatic person, right, i.e. the person we call the Buddha now, instructed and guided people in a particular mode, in a particular style, which he says, today we're going to look at this. He says, towards the end of his life, he said, all these years, I only talk about two things: suffering or dukkha, and the end of dukkha. And he says, my role is to address people's what we would call existential problem of dukkha, and nothing else. So actually, he wasn't a philosopher. He wasn't interested in philosophy. He wasn't an ontologist. He wasn't interested in, ultimately, what is this world made up of? No interest in there. So he wasn't, a social reformer, maybe accidentally, but that wasn't his interest. He was concerned about whoever was standing in front of him and their dukkha, their suffering. And then, based on his, Buddhists say this, you can take it or leave it, based on his all-knowing mind, he knew what to say. But even that, we saw cases where apparently he failed. So much for all-knowing. He failed, even when he addressed some people, they just kind of walked away. Okay, so at the beginning you have this figure, right? So it's just his words, and nothing was written down. Now he's passed, so there was an urgency to gather all his words together. And so the development of oral text. That went on for a few hundred years, and in a nutshell, oral texts were very reliable in the Buddha's time. People, the larger Indian culture gave a lot of value to oral texts. So there were not the kind of mistakes that we would make. All of us have played, right, as kids, the telephone game, right? None of that. So the oral texts were reliable. So that's not the problem. But then when oral texts turned into written texts, and written text became scripture. Some things were gained and some things were lost along these transformations. So that today, when we approach Buddhist texts, Buddhist scriptures, right, it has the weight of being scriptures. And there's something to be said about that. I don't mean to say, oh, this is a betrayal. Yeah, I'm not one of those who say we have to go back to the early, in Christianity, this is called like the primitive movement, right? Going back to the earliest. And there's no way to really go back to the earliest. Because what we have now is what has been passed down. But it doesn't mean that there is not enough evidence for us to do some kind of archaeology, so to say, to get a taste of how these teachings were meant to be received by us. Definitely not what the religion today tends to present it as scripture. Right? Once it's scripture, every word needs to be accounted for. Every comma, every period, every semicolon, and all those things, Actually, in Tibetan, there's very little punctuation. In classical Chinese, another major language for recording Buddhist text, there is zilch, zero punctuation. Gets even more exciting. Kind of fun to read Chinese Buddhist text. There's no punctuation, no comma, no period. So, depending on where you punctuate things, you can come up with other things. So anyway, I think that's an important lesson. Because now, right, when we look at Buddhist texts, when we listen to Buddhist teachings, for me, I'm more interested in you asking, okay, what's the take-home lesson? What can I take to heart from this? What is the context and what's the text? Right? And this dance between text and context is something that I think is important, to be always aware of our context and to have some ability and some tools to imagine. And so imagination is important, to imagine what was the context in which this scripture originally, wise words from the Buddha given to someone in the middle of suffering. Time and again, we saw that the Buddha had no interest in debating for the sake of philosophy, for the sake of philosophizing. He had no interest. People want to talk about cosmology to him. He's like, not interested. People want to talk about deep thoughts with him. Not interested. He did not bite the bait. Yeah. So try to listen to that class if you missed that one. So today, today we want to talk about, perhaps you could say, the central teaching that the Buddha gave, which I think all of you know it. Yeah? It's called the Four Noble Truths. So these Four Noble Truths, in some ways you could say, the Buddha taught for 45 years, and 45 years was elaborating on the Four Noble Truths. And beyond those 45 years, other Buddhist texts and scriptures developed. To the degree that they, in fact, the Buddha himself said this, to the degree that these other texts and scriptures could make claims that they are words of the Buddha. Somebody asked the Buddha before he died and say, we different people heard different things from you. How are we to know in the future which words, can we rely on and say, yeah, you taught this? The Buddha says, those which are in accord with the Four Noble Truths. Even if I did not literally say those words, those are my words. And that which does not accord with the Four Noble Truths, if even you hear me saying it, they are not my teachings. So this becomes a centrally important teaching. So we're going to look at the Four Noble Truths. So now let's see, share screen. Share. Okay. Now text aboard. Yes. Oh, I don't know how to get rid of all the other things. Aha, voila.
It's the pause. It's a scripture, it's pause.
Something?
You get to reshare just the, not keynote, but just the presentation.
Right.
No.
There we go.
Oh, good. What's that green stuff? Oh, okay. That's why we need young people. First, some, as usual, definitions. Yeah. Okay, don't get distracted by Keanu Reeves. He did play the Buddha in this Buddha production many, many years ago. So that is Siddhartha, wandering outside of the palace and being confronted by truths that apparently his father shielded him from. Yeah. Anyway, often, right, you will hear statements like, existence is suffering. According to the Buddha, existence is suffering. Or simpler translations, life is suffering. Existence is suffering, life is suffering. And the word that they're really translating from Sanskrit or Pali is this word, bhava. But it's a rather imprecise and to some degree, I would say, misleading translation. Bhava to translate as existence. Because for you and me, right, to say existence, it's without question, we're like, it's good. Because the opposite is what? Non-existence. So, I don't want non-existence, right? So already we have this assumption, it's good. And then now you say existence is suffering. Well, which might be true. However, more precise, what bhava more literally means when the Buddha says bhava, right? So it's basically saying bhava is dukkha. Dukkha is the other term that we'll look at when we get to the first noble truth, which is often translated as suffering. Even that is a little problematic. But let's just look at bhava. So another context where you might see this word bhava being translated as life is, are you familiar with the depiction called the Wheel of Life? Yeah, so it's basically painted in Tibetan style in a circle, and then like the realms of existence are there, and then there's like this big, right, demonic creature, right, clutching this whole thing.
Isn't that
yes
on the wall?
Yes, right. Where is it? Okay.
Before you go into the hallway, on the top of the wall.
Yeah, somewhere there is. Where is it?
Turn the corner.
Oh, really? Okay. Well, used to be somewhere that I would know exactly. Now, I'm not sure where it's gone. Yes. And it's often translated as the wheel of life. But it's not life as you and I know it. Because when we would use the word life, it's good. I'm alive. Life is good, right? I mean, the bumper sticker tells us that. How can life be suffering? Don't make bumper stickers that says life is suffering. Just get the life is good bumper sticker, okay? But it's not life. It's not, that translation is not, doesn't really tell us what the Buddha is pointing to. Buddha says bhava is dukkha, is suffering. Bhava, a more literal translation is becoming. Now, of course, Now, of course, if that was a bumper sticker, it will like, what? Becoming is suffering. So what does that mean? It means all those people with the other type of bumper stickers, you know what I'm talking about? I would rather be reading. I would rather be fishing. I would rather be golfing. I would rather be whatever except for I would rather be driving. That's bhava, becoming. Always wanting to be somewhere else, something else, some moment else. This constant process of never arriving, always on the go, always, always, always. Like even seated here, there's an element of, very excitedly I got here. Now very excitedly, when is this going to end? On some low level, on some level, it's like, oh, this chair is really good. But then another level eyeing over there, well, maybe that sitting on the floor looks pretty good over there. On some low level, there's always this hum of like, there could be something else. That could be someone else. That could be some other job. That could be some other town. That could be some other zip code. This constant, unending, becoming, instead of being. That, the Buddha says, is dukkha, is suffering. So this bhava there's another word for it, it's called samsara. Samsara is literally the circle, but it's a particular type of circle. In this circle, it's not circle of life. No, not that. And we're not talking about that. Here is this continuous process of wandering on, no rest, no security, no certainty. Wander on, wander on, wander on, wander on. No rest. Being pushed by our habits to keep wandering. It is said that the most liberating insight, knowledge that Siddhartha gained, that then transformed him from an ordinary human being like you and me into being a Buddha, an awakened one, is this third knowledge called the direct perception of the destruction of evil inclinations. That's talking about the destruction of bhava. That was when he became free from this wandering on, this continuous process of not resting, of not being secure, of constantly thirsting. At that third knowledge gain, all of this was over for him. Samsara stopped. So this is the existential problem that the Buddha proposed, proposed, and said. So if you think about like the different religions, right? They have different ways of articulating what is the problem. For some traditions, sin is the problem. For some tradition, disobedience is the problem. So for some tradition, action is the problem. So non-action is the solution. Now, maybe, in a deeper level, they are all, kind of grappling with the same set of issues. After all, we're all human beings. But I think it's also okay for us to Yeesh. It got muted or muted the whole time?
It got muted.
Oh, okay. Okay, good. So we're back in business. Right? Where was I? Yeah, the problem, right? So, like different traditions, different religious traditions, spiritual traditions, propose, to explain what the problem is. But this is how the Buddha explained what the problem is. Now let's go deeper now. Right? The Four Noble Truths, right? So at the third knowledge gain, yeah, again, Keanu Reeves. I don't know, that weird hairstyle. But which just goes to show that if you try to replicate that on a real human being, it looks really weird. But somehow on the statues, you're like, oh yeah, that's a Buddha. I mean, this is a multi-million production. You think they didn't have a hairstylist? They did, but you can't replicate it. What looks good on a statue on a human being? Anyway, not being too distracted, we come back to apparently when Siddhartha became Buddha, he said, destroyed is my birth. Consume is my striving. Done is what had to be done. I will not be born into another bhava. No more bhavaing around. It's done. Finished. Does this mean, that he has ceased to exist? No. But for him, bhava is over. Becoming is over. Then what is left? Well, Buddhists have, even among Buddhists, there's a range of comfort level in saying what is left. But definitely it's not a blank. So from right now I can say that. Even the most reluctant Buddhist tradition to say what happens when a Buddha, say the physical body of the Buddha is no more, right? He passed away, cremation happened. What is the status of that person? Even the most conservative, I would call that, most reluctant to say, will not say it's poof. So we'll look at the notion, which is the third noble truth, cessation or nirvana. What are we talking about when we say nirvana? Yeah. So at the first formal teaching that the Buddha gave to the 5 monks, he taught what is known as later, that whole discourse is called the Sutra, or the discourse on the turning of the wheel of Dharma, or the setting into motion the wheel of Dharma. And so an excerpt from that sermon is, the Buddha said, furthermore, monks, there are the Four Noble Truths. What for? The noble truth of dukkha, the noble truth of the origination of dukkha, the noble truth of the cessation of dukkha, and the noble truth of the way leading to the cessation of dukkha. So basically, dukkha, the origination of it, the cessation of it, and the way that leads to the cessation. Big picture first. Basically, then these four can be reduced to two: dukkha and the end of dukkha. So the first noble truth relates to the topic of dukkha. The next two noble truths, the end of dukkha, right? Then, in both cases, what else can you see there between the first and the two noble truths? What kind of relationship? Some of you may know this. Cause and effect. Yay! Causality, which is a big theme in the Buddha's teachings. Causality. So it's a cause and effect relationship. First noble truth is the effect of the second noble, what is taught in the second noble truth. Because of what is called the origin of dukkha, therefore dukkha. Then the third and the fourth noble truth, right? The third noble truth is the result, the effect of pursuing the fourth noble truth, the path. And so in a way, then you can say this is also about the topic of dukkha and its cessation, but also about causality. That often is missed, that causality part. To the degree that there are these now, what do they call themselves? Secular Buddhists that will say that, oh, causality, that's just, part of the Indian baggage. Karma, that's just part of Indian baggage. Siddhartha couldn't unload that baggage, and so he just continued talking like that. Then that just totally destroys the whole idea of an awakened one. How awakened is that if I can see that and he can't see that, right? Like, oh, karma. That's just a cultural baggage. Not so. At least, all Buddhist traditions will say not so. Centrally important to the Buddhist message is about causality. It's about karma. So anyway, the other thing to point out is, it's not in the slides here, in this teaching, with regards to these four truths, the Buddha gave also 4 verbs for each of the truth. So that will also tell us, in fact, this word truth is a little tricky, right? We're so used to that word being used in the context of religion and in the context of philosophy, right? And so even in Buddhist texts, or in Buddhist texts written in English, nobody can resist the temptation of giving the truth a what? Capital T. It's like you want people to take you seriously, put caps, right? Some of you are old enough to remember spiritual books written way back. It's like randomly capped everything, Now there's way less of that. But there were these like Theosophical Society or this non-mainstream religion, like they would cap every single thing that they could cap, Love, cap. Happiness, cap, So it's very, we get so used to, when we talk about religion or when we talk about philosophy and we put a capital T, instantly, right? Instantly, you already have a particular relationship with that word now, which is you find that you either have to agree with it or you have to fight with it. That's not how the Buddha intends the content of these 4 noble truths. And in fact, even the translation of the 4 noble truths, like what does that mean? Like truth is not enough, it has to be noble? Actually, a better translation is the 4 truths that ennobles. Like you become noble. Of course, this is playing on the Buddha's audience of ideas of nobility, ideas of being, right, good. So it's the 4 realities, the 4 truths, that when you see them, when you understand them, when you take them and practice them, it makes you noble. And so that's one point with the so-called 4 noble truths. So with each of the noble truths, there are also 4 verbs. With the first noble truth of dukkha or suffering, the verb there is recognize, see, notice, recognize. So it's a task These are not four truths for you to either sign on to or reject. These are four propositions that you begin to work with. Can you see, do you recognize that bhava is dukkha? Next, the origination or the origin or the cause of dukkha is what's known as trishna, thirst. Less literally, craving. Craving is the cause of dukkha. With regards to craving, Buddha says, relinquish. Relinquish. That's the verb. The third noble truth is the cessation of dukkha. In relation to cessation, the third noble truth, the Buddha says, experience it. And with the fourth, the path to the end of dukkha, the Buddha says, what's the verb there? Very interesting verb. It's not walk. You would think the path, right? Walk. Develop. What? Yeah, it's develop. So when we get there, we'll talk about that. But here, develop, I can first say, it's not like make up your own way. Right? Because we Americans, we like to make up our own way and then, go get it copyrighted and patented, and then someone will sell it for you. It's not develop in that sense. Develop means you have to develop that within yourself. The path is not, even metaphorically, some preset road that you will all walk on. It's not. It's a process of unfolding within yourself. And so you develop this path. Yeah. Dukkha, usually translated as suffering, but it covers a range of feelings. Suffering, unsatisfactoriness, dis-ease, pain, stress, trauma. This whole range is what dukkha covers. Dukkha, the etymology of this, ka is space. Duk is uncomfortable. To be in an uncomfortable space. And the etymology of dukkha is also related with axle and rod. It's when it doesn't fit. And so a card with bad fitting axle and rod, that's dukkha. And then all the sounds and,
No bearings.
yes, everything just off. Dukkha, that's the etymology. So it covers this whole range. So a lot of times when we say, oh, Buddha says life is suffering, I think we miss out so much. And not just missing out so much, but missing out the most important point of this first noble truth. It's not life. It's not, well, first of all, this is not a prescription. Make life suffering. Life is suffering. Why are you enjoying yourself? You see people having a good time, you're like, don't you know life is suffering? No, that's not what the Buddha wants us to do. But the Buddha does want us to recognize that as long as it's bhava, and to whatever degree that we're invested in this mode of bhava, becoming, that then you don't have a choice, it will entail dukkha. And the most subtle level of dukkha, this is famously, maybe by now, some of you, I said the most subtle form of dukkha is not part of, we'll go through the classical definitions of different types of dukkha, but my most subtle form of dukkha, which is the basic building blocks for all the other types of dukkha that we're going to talk about here is the dukkha of Yeah, it's the dukkha of It's very imprecise. We don't know exactly what is wrong. Something is just not quite right.
Let go.
Hmm?
Let go.
Yeah, but because it's so subtle, you just don't notice. But it's there. Eh. When I first sat down here tonight, it's pretty good. Now I'm already thinking, should I go order, some gel thing to add to this sagging cushion here? Right? It's not actively torturing me. Nobody put like blades on here. Not yet. And, but it's this, right? I should have taken off this. Right? But because it's just slightly you don't pay attention to it. And the solution is not like with every you try to do something, then, right, that produces its own set of Knowing the is there is not therefore feed it, but recognize that it's there. And then learn, like, it's okay. That's part of the deal of having a body. Because these little eventually conspire to become and they aggregate to become and they aggregate to become why me? When we get to the why me part, it's too late. Life is suffering. What to do? It's too late. That's the bad news. So it's sometimes kind of hard, for me, I don't know. Other people may be better at it. When suffering has really turned up for someone else and they come to me, I'm like, well, what am I supposed to say? Like nice things? Well, I could. Well, I could be better at saying nice things. That's, yes, I can improve there. But it's like, well, what to say? It's too late, There was a quote, confession here. I started watching Game of Thrones. Resisted it forever, even pandemic, Talk about addiction. There was a quote in there. I don't know, season 3 or 4, someone's grandmother. It's almost like the Game of Thrones equivalent of Downton Abbey, matriarch. Not as good, but there's a little hint of that. This other grandmother says something like, when the milk has already come out of the others, there's no way of getting it back in. More eloquently. Yeah, you get the idea, There's no getting the milk back into the other, once it's come out. So once suffering has come to that point, it's too late, There's not much the Buddha can do, that the Buddhist teachings can do. Not that there's nothing, but at that point, it's a little hard. So where this teaching about dukkha, it really is at the subtle level. And that is why the goal of Buddhist meditation is not just to calm things down and to feel good, but it's actually to train your mind to see the most subtle level of and learn how to release the stress, the subtle stress that comes up from these tiny, tiny little And that's actually the dukkha of the five aggregates. The last, here. Dukkha of the five aggregates, the three types of dukkha. That's the most subtle dukkha. But until we can directly see the operation of this subtle dukkha, then we have no way to train those subtle muscles of letting go, of fighting with this. Because right now the is because we're fighting it. We don't even know. Like a lot of our bodily process, we don't know, right? But it's going on. Like inflammation, it's going on. You just don't know until it becomes obvious. But it's aggregating there. So the real purpose of Buddhist meditation, most of us engage in Buddhist meditation just for the hour, the half an hour of, which is good, because often that can last another hour or two. But that's not solving any real problems. That's just time out from getting back into the ring. The real purpose of Buddhist meditation is to develop the ability, the insight we call it, to see this most subtle level of dukkha and know how to respond to that dukkha. So the dukkha of the five aggregates underlies are the building blocks of dukkha of change. Dukkha of change is talking about, just precisely the example I gave, when we first came in here, because we were rushing here, because we had a long day and everything, and you're like, oh, it's so nice to come to the temple. Everyone is smiling and everyone is whispering. Temperature is just right, But then things change, And you're like, wait, did I really want to come here tonight? I mean, sometimes it's just a random thought, but that's, for some of us, that's enough to start a whole chain of thoughts. And then now you are daydreaming, oh yeah, once I get home, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that. Oh, he's telling a joke, let's laugh. Or for some of you, it's like the thought came and then it triggered a whole chain of guilt. Oh, I'm such a bad Buddhist. I'm such a bad Buddhist. Bad. It's just the dukkha of change. And enough of dukkha of change turns into the dukkha of dukkha. That's the screaming and yelling form of dukkha. And that's the dukkha of birth, the dukkha of old age, the dukkha of sickness, and the dukkha of death. The dukkha of change is the dukkha of involvement, separation, and not attaining. Involvement means getting stuck with what or who we don't like. That's miserable. Being separated from what we like, who we like, where we like, that's dukkha. And not getting who we like, what we like, where we like, that's dukkha. So that's falls under the dukkha of change. The psychophysical constituents, those are the aggregates. That's the most subtle dukkha, the dukkha of the five aggregates. So the Buddha talked about this. Can we see? Are we noticing that if we are operating on the bhava mode, then dukkha is always there?
Question.
Yes.
Where in that categories does the suffering of anxiety and uncertainty, where does that fall?
Change.
Both?
Yes. Yeah. I would say they fall under change, right? Anxiety and uncertainty. Uncertainty is the more behind anxiety. Then anxiety, if it turns into like panic attacks, that's the first type of dukkha. That's the dukkha of dukkha. So this is not like three airtight. It's a spectrum.
I'm talking about just low-lying anxiety, not the,
Right, then that is more like, that is closer to the side of things. Right, then panic attacks would go to the, right, so it's on the spectrum. Yeah, so that's there, And part of Buddhist training, right, in terms of meditation, is not really to get rid of, but a certain kind of acceptance, like this is just how it is. But how it is also, later we'll learn, it's not permanent. Ride it through. The cause of dukkha, second noble truth, that which we should relinquish, that which we should let go, that which we should drop, is what's called trishna, or thirst. In Sanskrit is trishna. Literally is thirst, often translated as craving. So again, the Buddha, over the years of him teaching and talking to different people, later Buddhist tradition says, basically the Buddha talked about 3 types of craving. Craving for objects of sense desire. That's probably the kind of craving that when you hang out with religious people, when they say craving, mostly that's the craving they're talking about. That's when all of us come to the conclusion. Religion is an anti-fun cult. Doesn't matter what brand, they're all part of the same cult. Whatever you think is fun, they tell you bad, 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 right? The Buddha is not interested in, messing up your party. It's not a party pooper, But he is pointing out how craving for the objects of sense desire leads to dukkha. Pleasure itself is not the problem. Craving for pleasure, that's the problem. In fact, pain is a problem. Pleasure is not a problem. In fact, in the mindfulness of breath, the 16 stages of mindfulness of breath, one of the main forms of meditation that the Buddha taught, he taught how to purposely induce joy and pleasure. But a kind of joy and pleasure is not anchored to sense experiences. In fact, this was Buddha's response to the earlier training as Siddhartha, where he used mortification. Right? Starving himself, depriving himself of food and sleep, and doing all kinds of ascetic austerities. He found that to be useless. He says pain doesn't lead to the mind becoming free. Pleasure does, but a particular type of pleasure, which is a pleasure that doesn't involve craving for the objects of sense desire. But it's possible to achieve a different kind of pleasure, that which is not anchored on sense experiences. Sight, sound, smell, taste, touch. Craving for the objects of sense desires lead to dukkha. Craving for existence lead to dukkha. And craving for non-existence, to be or not to be. These are more subtle forms of craving. Craving to be, all our, I want to be this, I want to be that, I want to be this, I don't want to be, then I don't want this, I don't want that. And even to the point of, I want to annihilate myself and take myself out of this completely and become nobody. That is dukkha. This is not a judgment. You have to remember that this is not a system, right, based on a higher power has determined these things are good, these things are bad. If you find yourself falling under this camp, you have become bad. You have craving, oh, bad, bad, bad. No, this is a diagnosis. This is a diagnosis, a system of diagnosing what is the problem. And where does this problem come from? This problem comes from craving. We all crave. All kinds of cravings. Does that make you a bad person? No, it doesn't make you a bad person. It just makes you a person. So it's not a judgment. Now, of course, when Buddhism or the Buddha's teachings became an ism, yeah, religious people judge. Doesn't matter what brand, It's just human beings doing their thing. But the teachings themselves, this is not about judgment. This is seeing clearly. And where does craving come from? Craving comes from not seeing. Not seeing things as they are, instead seeing things as they appear to be. And gullibly, or maybe to some degree, kind of, self-centeredly, we think the way we see things is truly how they are. So what I see to be desirable, of course it's desirable. What do you mean it's not? What is wrong with you? What I see to be despicable, what? You're not outraged by that? If you are not outraged, you must be asleep. So everything, there's so many causes in this world that is wanting to trigger us. Even with the best intentions of saving the world, But that's very emotional. Here Buddha says, you need to develop clear seeing that cuts through emotions. These strong emotions, because they cloud us. They cloud us. So this ignorance, this not seeing things as they are, this misperception, this distorted view, they are what leads to craving. So to elaborate further, this Buddha says, from ignorance, then attachment and aversion is the result. When you, something going on? Oh, no, it's fine. When you don't see clearly, then the result is like or dislike turns up, push and pull. If you don't see things as they are, then attachment and aversion arises. So in this wheel of becoming, at the very center of the wheel are these three animals. And one way of depicting them, so the pig is the ignorance, the snake is the aversion, and the rooster is the desire. And you see how they are biting each other's tail. So that means, there's no beginning and no end. They're acting. In some depiction, it's the two other animals, the snake and the rooster, more rare this one, but you can see them. The rooster and the snake coming out of the mouth of the pig. So like the ignorance is more fundamental. Yeah. Now.
I have
Yes.
a question
Uh-huh.
on Zoom.
Okay.
Someone asked, what about suffering from a veteran with PTSD, basically trauma suffering?
What is what about? Like what about? Can the person elaborate? Like meaning like what is? Clarify the question for me. Yeah, so we can come back to that. They can type, and then you can stop me. I want to answer that question. But in order to answer, like, what about, meaning there are so many possibilities of what the question might be. Right? It's the question like, do I think it's justified, not justified, good, bad, or how do you categorize it? Maybe that's the question. But let's clarify before. It's coming through? Okay.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think you said earlier that when someone is suffering, it's too late.
Too late in the sense of, very hard to apply the teachings.
So then they ask, how does the student stabilize?
There are many ways. Yeah, and so when I say too late, right, there I don't literally mean too late. That's just part of me saying I find it really hard at that point, because at that point, then what people need is more soothing, painkillers. And so Buddhism has developed a set of painkillers. Say prayers, turn your mind away from the pain, and things like that. And so there are many, many methods, of course. What I mean by too late is it has built up to a point where at that point, all you can do is, of course, on the physical level, right? Obviously, you take whatever interventions that can help to calm that down, right? Then on the spiritual, if you want to call it that, spiritual level, there at that point is you find ways to not let that create more suffering. And so you learn to let go of that moment. When I say too late, I don't mean hopeless. I mean the main way to solve the more basic problem is hard to apply that at that point. So it's a good question.
You lose perspective.
Yeah, because you lose perspective and
Can't see.
you cannot see at that point because you're so consumed by that pain. And so you have to do other things first to cool that down. And then you'll be more receptive. So in a way, I'm also saying like Buddhism doesn't have such easy answers for when someone is in the middle of being completely consumed in pain, I feel. Because it's hard for us to say things like, everything will be fine. No, I don't know.
Well, a panic attack, for instance, is not,
Yeah, that's different, yeah.
I mean, but that would, that comes out of, I don't know, I'm getting a little confused here, but, what did you say about panic earlier? You were saying anxiety?
Oh, no, that was just clarifying the question of like when anxiety, I said, when an anxiety has gone to the level of a panic attack unfolding,
Right.
what kind of dukkha is that? That will be the dukkha of dukkha, of the three types of dukkha. We're just kind of classifying things. Yeah, yeah.
Serious dukkha.
Yeah, that's like serious dukkha at that point, and
Well,
that,
I mean, it sounds kind of like this is what this person is,
yeah, maybe, but
serious dukkha,
yeah, and at that,
traumatic stress disorder.
right, and well, the PTSD is, it has its kind of coming and going, and when it flares up and when it's, so yeah, I mean, I'm not a medical expert, so I can't address that on that level. Basically, what I'm saying is that when suffering gets to that level, then mainly, I think a medical intervention needs to happen. Don't turn to Buddhism and think, it will help me solve. Unfortunately, because especially in this context, this culture, Buddhism is, always often associated with psychology. Then people, who need like medical intervention and understandably too, it's not always something that works, and people get so frustrated over there, and then they turn to Buddhism and think that it can substitute that. In my personal experience, I think that's very dangerous. Don't do that.
Is that what you mean by it's too late?
Yes, to come to Buddhism hoping for a cure.
Right.
Yeah.
You should have dealt with it.
Yeah, or in that case, right, in those situations, there are medical interventions that you should first turn to. When that calms down, then, yeah, you can address the deeper issues. And the deeper issues, never too late. That's what the Dharma is for. You know. The equivalence is like in Asia, which is like many of us for generations that we're Buddhists, you know. The most often when people turn up to the temple, especially people who don't normally turn up to the temple, it's when what happens? Well, yeah, you know, well, when they're dead, they don't come.
Trauma, sadness, suffering.
No, not that, not the inner stuff. Lost their job, lost their boyfriend, lost their girlfriend. Disaster happened. Then they come to the temple. Oh, please, can you do something for me? Is there a prayer? Is there a ritual? Is there That's when they turn up.
It'd be like me trying to teach Dharma to my 15-year-old daughter who was like in the middle of the worst breakup or something.
Yeah.
Like that. It just wouldn't, she couldn't
Right.
take it in.
So here, like Dharma teachers have to play the role of, you know, unlicensed, you know, therapists. In Asia, nobody comes to me for those things. They would come and go, I think my house is haunted. And I like, okay. Let's see. So I have found myself in situations where I was like translating for some of my Tibetan teachers, you know, and in one case, okay, I don't translate from Tibetan to Chinese. It's translating in this. So to be clear, it's kind of like from one dialect of Chinese to another. This one Tibetan teacher, he knows like Mandarin Chinese, you know, then the local people spoke another dialect, okay? Really, like, people would come in and, you know, they will say things like that, like, you know, I think my son is possessed, I think, you know, and then they're like, so there was one, you know, like someone that said, you know, I don't know what is wrong, you know, like, I've been having these pains here and these pains here, you know, what can I do, you know? Then the teacher goes, have you changed your pillow recently? It's like you might want to, you know, do something with your pillow. And of course, the poor woman goes, what? Because they were expecting something else. So we are all suffering, you know. But it's interesting. It illuminates, you know. Like here in the West, nobody, well, not nobody, that has happened before. Rarely anybody comes up to me and say, you know, I have this pain or that pain. Do you think spirits are causing it? Can you perform an exorcism? You know, or can you do something to help me get a job? Or, you know, rare, you know. But that is their form of, it's too late. Or maybe not too late, just change a new pillow, you know. Now, third noble truth is called cessation. So the word for cessation is nirodha. But there's another word that also applies to the third noble truth, which is the attainment or the experience of nirvana. Now, nirvana has a bad name. Not the band. Although, you know, joking aside, there is a certain nihilistic association with the word nirvana. So Buddhism talks about suffering. Nirvana is to extinguish. Literally, is to snuff out. And so there's a certain nihilistic flavor to the way people understand nirvana. Is to snuff out, literally, is to extinguish. But this was a metaphor that the Buddha used to explain what liberation and freedom is. Unfortunately, it's been mistranslated, especially in the modern period. In order to appreciate this metaphor, we need to see how the Buddha's audience, the ancient audience, in that Vedic culture, their understanding of what happens when you snuff out a flame is different from our everyday notion of snuffing out or extinguishing a flame. Here, in our everyday kind of modern notion or, commonsensical version, when we say to extinguish or to snuff out, we mean extinct, non-existence. To turn something that used to exist into now being non-existent. But in ancient India, they understand a flame or a fire to be essentially a temporary trapping of something that is naturally and innately not trappable. That which is free, which given certain conditions become temporarily trapped in the form of a flame. And as long as the fuel is there, this flame continues. But when the fuel is finished, the energy that is contained in this flame becomes free. So for the Buddha's audience, nirvana, to extinguish, is essentially a metaphor of freedom. Cannot locate anymore. Freed. No one can say it's here or here or here or here anymore. No more forwarding address. Never mind all of this. La 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 la. So one very famous verse, the Buddha talking about this nirvana. He says, there is, monks, an unborn, unbecome, unmade, uncompounded. If there were not the unborn, unbecome, unmade, uncompounded, there would not be the case of emancipation from the born, the become, the made, the expound, the compounded. Would not be discerned. But precisely because there is this unborn, unbecome, unmade, uncompounded, then emancipation, freedom from the born, the become, the made, compounded is thus discerned. That we can see. So there is this state that is unborn, unbecome, unmade, uncompounded. Right now, we are compounded. We are made, so to say. We are constantly becoming, and we're constantly birthing. There is a freedom from this. So nirvana is the state of calming and release from dependencies. No longer needing that fuel. So in one of the ancient texts called the Path of Purification, nir, the etymology, is un, and vana is binding. So nirvana, the etymology is to become unbound. The unbinding. Unbinding of what? The unbinding of dukkha. And the unbinding of mind, that little mind, that limited mind. The I, the unbinding of the I. The burden of walking around carrying this notion of I, and then from I, me, and then from me, mine. And then the fear of losing mine, and losing me. and losing I. That is over. Unbound. Yes.
Is this a continuous state or is it just something flashes through?
They say unending. Yeah. Sometimes it has a good question, because sometimes it's been explained as if it's that's it, you know. But then there's also lots of descriptions of how the unbinding continues. That it just keeps expanding in such unimaginable way. Yeah. So deathlessness is experienced, no sense of I experiencing this deathlessness even. Just there is this, there is deathlessness. Because part of the deathlessness is the I. That limited I is no longer there. The bearer of suffering has been released, unbound. So that's why, you know, in descriptions of nirvana, it's stated often in the negative, but then that created this misunderstanding that it's just like wiping out. Cessation of viewing experience in terms of self, of I. So the self and non-self dichotomy, that it's over. Self and other. That just, you're freed. A couple of songs. So one of the early nuns, Sister Patachara, she left behind some words describing her experience of this unbinding. Washing my feet, I noticed the water, and in watching it flow from high to low, my heart was composed like a fine thoroughbred steed. And taking a lamp, and so this feet washing is referring to, this is an Indian custom, before you go to bed, wash your feet. So she was by the stream, washing her feet, getting ready to retire for the night. Then taking the lamp, I entered the hut, checked the bedding, sat down on the bed, and taking a pin, I pulled out the wick. Like the flames unbinding was the liberation of awareness. In that moment, that was the moment of her unbinding. Yeah? Coincided with the moment of pulling the wick out of the oil. It happened. Liberation of awareness. Unbound. Yes?
Liberation of awareness. So is it, can you say something about that?
Mind freed.
Yeah.
Mind has become freed. No longer bound.
So not liberation from awareness, but...
Not liberation from awareness, but of awareness. Awareness now is bound.
Yeah.
Unbound.
So awake.
Awake. Freed. No longer bound. No longer limited. No longer identifying with I, me, and mine.
Is that possible? I mean, this actually.
So the Buddha claimed. So the Buddha claimed.
It seems like you would miss if you miss something. If you...
Say more. Miss what? Yeah, you miss suffering. Then you can write songs about missing suffering.
Well, being loved. The feeling of being loved.
Maybe. Or that feeling doesn't end. Our feeling of being loved, right, is always threatened by not being loved.
So do away with the feeling.
No, that's not how you solve the problem. Doing away with the feeling of being loved is just trying to snuff out something because you are afraid of losing it. That's not the solution. Good question. It's not that. Yeah? So also you cannot say to someone who is craving, stop. Doesn't work like that. It's to see through it, that you're no longer bound by it. So that expression, the feeling of being loved, that doesn't end anymore. I have a colleague, when I started at Warren Wilson College, Jeannie Summers, she still lives in the area. But both of us are no longer in academia. We got unbound from that, from that creature. And she, at one time, she was very involved in Buddhist-Christian dialogue, and she wrote an article that she published. It's called, it's a hymn, a Christian hymn, Jesus Loves Me. Yes, I know, because the Bible tells me so, right? She substituted the word Bible with Buddha, because the Buddha tells me so. That was the title of her article. Kind of explaining how her delving into Buddhism helped her to understand, of course Jesus loves me. Why not? Of course Jesus loves everyone.
Can you speak to us a little bit about love and non-attachment?
Briefly, there is the kind of love where you have that you are constantly, loudly or softly afraid of losing. And then depending on how loud or soft that is, it turns into control. Right? And it's all dukkha all the way. Yeah. So non-attachment, I don't like the word non-attachment. My preferred translation is unentangled, free of entanglements. Yes?
Not clinging.
Not clinging, not bound, free of entanglements. Because, when we hear the word like detached, more and more now I'm teaching like Latin Americans, detached, no, not possible. Fiery types, if I was teaching like, Lutherans in the Midwest, then yes, that would resonate, detached like. But it's not detached in the like, emotionally flat and emotionally unavailable. It's not being bound by emotions. Do you still experience that? Oh, yes. So I said, it's hard if we think in the abstract, right? So then instead of thinking in the abstract, and that is when you say, well, what is the closest profile of an enlightened being, right? Well, some of you were familiar with like Thich Nhat Hanh. Look at that, that's the example. Is he not functional? Was he not functional? No, look at what he did, right? And still alive and well, getting old. The Dalai Lama, that's the closest to being what a Buddha might look like. I'm not making claims that either of them are Buddhas, but if there is anyone closest to, these are the types of figures. Look at them. Do they have flat, unavailable emotional lives? No. Have you heard the Dalai Lama laughing? That's like a signature, Even when he's talking about suffering, he just cracks up like, ka, 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 ka. And if you're not familiar with that, you think, is he laughing at me for being miserable? You know, I actually have people saying that to me, like, I don't know, I feel a little weird that he's talking about suffering, and I'm like, yeah, I'm suffering. Next thing is he's burst out laughing, you know? Yes.
Thich Nhat Hanh actually has a quote
Mhm.
about love and loving people. It's something along the lines of we must love in a way that the person that we're loving feels completely free. So like not controlling.
Not control. Yeah. Yeah, so, sure. Oh, la 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 la. Another quote. Here, Hemaka, with regard to things that are dear, seen, heard, sensed, and cognized, there is the dispelling of desire and passion, the undying state of unbinding. Yeah, so see, language like that, again, in terms of translation, if you didn't know, like, the bigger picture, you would think, oh, no more desire, no more, things that are dear, you have to give up. It's not telling you that you have to get rid of these things. It's saying you're not limited by that anymore. Yeah? If you are considering this to be dear, then you're getting ready of losing that dear thing. Then you also have, what else do you have? That which is not dear. And once we are stuck in these categories, whatever we have temporarily is always temporarily. To be free from that is not to become neutral. To be free from that is, in short, all the good stuff, none of the bad stuff. All the good stuff, none of the bad stuff. Those knowing this, mindful, fully extinguished, unbound in the here and now, are forever calm, have gone beyond entanglement in the world. Not only do you become free, you can now become a source of freeing others, of being good to others, and to be good for others. The path, just briefly, because, that's a whole big topic, right? So in terms of the path, this is something that we have to develop. Develop clear view, perfect view, meaning clear understanding of what is the problem. Following that, then we begin to adjust our thoughts and emotions and our speech and our actions, body, speech, and mind, the three domains. That's where actions take place. Mental, emotional actions, verbal actions, physical actions. Then, more concretely, our livelihood. We have to look into that. Are we causing harm in our livelihood? And so there are specific lists in each of these categories. So for example, for livelihood, they say don't sell poison, don't sell weapons, don't sell livestock, don't sell humans. So these are traditional lists of like wrong livelihood. Livelihood that involves cheating, lying, stealing, wrong livelihood. So kind of concretely. Effort is the effort to keep developing, right? The virtuous qualities, the good mental qualities, and the effort to eradicate the mental defilements. Mindfulness, and finally, meditative concentration. Meditative concentration is the ability of the mind to be stable and not go up and down, up and down, up and down. Becoming more and more stable. Not becoming more and more narrow focused, but stable. So that's called the Noble Eightfold Path. In terms of talking about the path, there are many variations of it. Another one is called the three trainings. So disciplined conduct. And this is where, the do's and the don'ts, the vows that Buddhists take. Not because they are moral codes, but because if you want your mind to be more stable and not having all those ups and downs and being blown away, all over the place, your actions, you need to have a clear conscience. A clear conscience means not causing harm to others. To whatever degree you can minimize causing harm to others, to that degree, it'll be easier for you to be at ease. And only when you are at ease can you develop clear seeing wisdom. Without being at ease, the mind, clear seeing is next to impossible. So this is the path. And the path is to be, as I said earlier, to be developed. It's something that, it's not like you follow this like you're checking off a list, This is not like Buddhist catechism. To be a good, Catholic or Christian, you have to follow these rules. But these are what the Buddha offered us and say, you develop this. Your process is in the end your own process. Even as all this is described as this is good, 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 do this, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, right? But this is not to be taken as like someone has decreed this, but rather, going back to the basic metaphor, the Buddha was a supreme healer, physician, not lawgiver, a physician. So a physician's, so the words that come out of the physician is basically prescription and proscription. Not permission, right? And not prohibition. It's prescription and proscription. Proscription is basically, okay, don't eat cheese, this phlegm and mucus, but I like cheese. Well, go ahead, turn into a 100-day cough. Doesn't make me a bad person. It does make me miserable when that moment of eating cheese is over. Doesn't make you a bad person. That you have a lot of anger doesn't make you a bad person, really, from the Buddhist perspective. But it does mean you have a lot of suffering. So do you want that or you don't want that? That's all. If you're okay with that, okay, fine, no problem. The Buddha has nothing to say to you. If you're happy with samsara, congratulations, you figured it out. No problem. In fact, the Buddha says, don't disturb people with your truth. He actually said to the monks, don't disturb people with the truth. Leave them alone. But if they come to you and say, I have a suspicion that I'm not seeing certain things, he says, then you're allowed to talk to them. So Buddhist missionaries are a little weird. Because the Buddha did not say, don't be a missionary. In fact, he says, go teach others. But in teaching others, there are some rules, which is you cannot disturb people by asking them, are you happy? Are you really happy? No. If people think they're fine, they're fine. But when they come to you, yes.
There's a comment. Sounds like the Buddha was teaching others to become their highest self.
Mhm.
There are other ways to become your highest self.
Probably.
That's where we have recovery dharma.
Yeah, it says that the Buddha Dharma has 84,000 ways. The Buddha Dharma, meaning the Dharma that makes you a Buddha, not the Dharma that's owned by the Buddha. The Buddha, and further translation, the truths, right? Small t, don't make it big T, that will make you awake. Buddha Dharma. Buddha Dharma is often, superficially interpreted as the Buddha's Dharma, like he owns it, No, he doesn't own it. But what he taught, the Dharmas, if we know how to use them, we will wake up. So in terms of this, I have my own, again, some of you already know this, I have my own name for this Four Noble Truths. I call it the Four Noble Rumors. Rumors. It has been rumored that power is dukkha. And it's a noble rumor. So yes, some degree of faith is there. As in, the Buddha, the noble one, taught this. So you have enough trust, right? That this is not like fake news, right? False rumor, vicious rumor. You have enough trust for whatever reason. This is a noble rumor. So it's better to relate to these as rumors, noble rumors. Because what do you do with rumors?
Try to confirm that.
Try to confirm it. Try to verify it. And not believing, Just believe the rumor. No, like enough curiosity to say, well, let's see. This is what the Buddha wants us to do with these four truths. That's why there are the four verbs. The four verbs is is the actual method to turn the four noble rumors into the four ennobling truths. And the truth shall set you free. Yes? Okay, Tata, we're done today.
Amazing.
All of tonight is part of that search of this so-called I, which is the practicum for tonight. A second part from the last time we met. Who is this I? Again, not a philosophical question, not an ontological question, not even a religious question, but look at this burden that we carry around. I, and from I, me, and from me, mine. Even put aside this word like egotistical. I have a lot of people coming to me, like, oh, my ego. I was like, what's wrong with your ego? It comes from a different mode of spirituality where ego is like the problem, Ego is not necessarily the problem here. Because when you think of it like, oh, you're so egotistical, right? If somebody says that to you, or if you say that to yourself, right? That's a judgment. When the Buddha says that this I is a burden, it's not a judgment. Right? It's saying, are you tired of it or not? So it's not about whether you're a good person or a bad person that you have ego. It's not that issue, really. So if you hang out here long enough, you'll notice that I never use the word ego. I never problematize egotistical, because I think that's a whole other way of looking at what the problem is, which doesn't resonate with what the Buddha. I'm not saying there's no value to that, but it's just simply not really part of this system. Yeah, and if we confuse them, then we are losing like the edge, of this system. I'm a big fan of keeping the edges sharp in each system. Then they can do effectively what they can do best. I like diversity. I don't want to make everyone like me. I don't need all religions to be one, Ugh, yuck. So I go to buffets, So many things to choose. Potluck, yeah, potluck, Thank you for the plug. This Sunday, And you never know who's going to bring what, right? Of course, me, nervously at every potluck, I'm like, oh my God, there is going to be like 8 rice there. Anyway, thanks for coming. So because I had to cancel one class, that was when this turned up, way back. So we are one class behind. So what this means that we are going to extend one more Thursday from the original date. At first I thought I need to catch up and try to compress it into 7, because originally a group of us were going to Peru. Peru is having a lot of unrest right now. It's a big problem. So we have to change our plans, so we're not going to Peru. So I'll be around so I can extend to 1 week after. So anyway, take a moment now, what we call the dedication of merit. So the idea here is to take a moment to think, like whatever that I got from here, including me, sharing time with you, whatever I got from this experience, that which is positive, that which is good, and that which is comforting, and that which is enlightening, that which is awakening. Let this experience become a spark for us to be able to share with others in whatever appropriate way, that may others too have the opportunity to find some relief, some solace, some clarity, some love, some moment of ease in a way that we have found. So take a moment to think about how fortunate we are and how this fortune, many other people don't have it. And in thinking about that, we wish that they too, in their own time, in their own way, may they be able to find ways of being free from suffering, free from being bound, free from being entangled, and may it be so. Good night, and Shayna is getting ready for the best part of this evening, the snacks back there. She has been diligently making sure that we are all provided with good snacks. That is to compensate for whatever that didn't go too well in the blah, blah, blah. I was in Bali, Indonesia, a few months back, and I learned something about the Hindu tradition there. So they have a tradition of playing gamelan, these percussionist music, and dancing. So in the dancing, the dancers, they have all kinds of gestures, right? So it was really interesting when we were there. And the musicians and the dancers, they say, the traditional context of this performance, of the dance and the music, is at temple rituals. And their role at the temple rituals is to compensate for whatever inadequacies or mistakes that the priests might have done in the inner sanctum and they are on the outside, and they work in tandem. Because the priest chants mantras, and if any of the mantras were mispronounced, or not said, or oversaid, the music compensates for it. And the priests, when they chant mantras, they perform mudras, ritual gestures. And whatever that has been done wrong, the dancers compensate. So beautiful. It's like, oh, so that's what it's for. So that the gods are in a state of equilibrium. However you imagine the gods, whatever they are. And this is offered to them. So same thing, Thank goodness there are snacks. Good night.
Thank you.
Ta-ta, everybody.
Thank you.
Sure.